Excellent. So welcome. It seems like we have a much bigger virtual audience today than we have a live audience in person. But with that, the couple things, real quick show of hands. How many of you have been to one of these events before? And how many, in VirBela, you can raise your hands too. I see some hands up. How many of you have never been to one of these before? Cool. Part of the reason we do that is because we also want to teach the people in VirBela how to raise their hands. But with that, so this is the Next Evolution AWE Nite Chicago event series, produced by VRAR Chicago. Apologies, I'm going to try and do this as I'm advancing slides. But anyway, so the discussion, VRAR Chicago, just a couple things to know about this event, what we do. This is an event series that is always free. We've been running this event now for over 6 years, monthly, and it's always free to be attended. It's always free to attend, always will be. Every month we pick an industry that is our topic for the month. We will bring in experts from that industry. Some of them are going to be AR, VR folks that work in the industry. Some of them are just going to be industry experts that may be able to express some needs for AR and VR technology. But again, the other main thing that we always want to bring out is that the focus of the event is our audience. We're not here to sell anything. We're not here to pitch our services or our software or anything like that. The whole point of this event is for our audience members to be able to take their next step forward with immersive technology, whatever that may be. And with that, as I mentioned, we bring in experts to talk about that. So tonight we'll have a few speakers. We have Dr. Shawna Pandya. We have Emily I'm going to butcher names. I apologize now.
Apollonio. Yep.
We have Elsa Varghese. And we have Barnett. You'll be hearing from them shortly. But other things we got to get through some real quick just messages about, again, can't make this event happen without a whole lot of help and a whole lot of people. So one of the things we are also, besides being produced by VRAR Chicago, we are AWE Nite Chicago, Augmented World Expo. AWE's mission is to help XR community advance augmented reality and virtual reality technology in order to further human progress. There are 32 AWE Nites all over the world. They also have the AWE Live web community and platform, which is essentially like LinkedIn for the XR community. So I would definitely suggest if you're not a part of it or you don't know about it, please check it out. There are some upcoming events. Actually, later this month is Augmented World Expo, the actual North American Augmented World Expo, which will be taking place at the end of the month, May 30th to June 2nd, I believe, or May 31st to June 2nd. I'll find out on the next slide. But we do have a discount code for anybody who plans to actually go and attend that event. If you don't have your passes yet, you can get a discount using the code that is currently on the screen. AWE USA is taking place May 31st to June 2nd in Santa Clara, California. Asia is August 30th to 31st in Singapore, and EU is in 24th to 25th of October in Vienna. Beyond that, they also have other upcoming events and AWE Academy. Really quickly, I want to talk about VRAR Chicago, the organization that essentially produces this event. VRAR Chicago was started by producing, frankly, this event series, and then shortly before the pandemic, expanded into other immersive technology events and trade shows. During the pandemic, evolved into consulting and immersive technology event production. And they also do a lot of other kinds of consulting in the space. If you need any help, please check in with, normally I would say Matt Valtman, but Ron is sitting at the VRAR Chicago desk today. So he's happy to answer any questions. I'm happy to answer any questions. But ultimately, the whole purpose of VRAR Chicago is to, again, advance the technology in the city. Beyond that, real quick, this is the Next Evolution. Again, this is a free event. It is volunteer run. Everybody who works this event is doing so for free. We are always happy to accept donations, and I'll try to make that easier and actually have a link on this slide at some point in the near future when I get to it. But in the meantime, feel free to contact me if anyone wants to make a donation. With that, though, we are going to really quickly invite our physical venue sponsor up to the stage to introduce this space that we are all sitting in for those who don't necessarily know it. With that.
Thank you so much. Hey, y'all. I'm Lydia. I'm here with 1871. Can I get a show of hands who's been in our space before? Okay, a couple. For those of you who haven't, if you're unfamiliar with 1871, we are a nonprofit incubator and innovation hub. We support the full maturity curve for businesses. So we do early stage, growth stage, and corporate businesses. We help them in growing their businesses. So you'll see we have co-working space out in the lobby, and we host tons of events and programmings for our members throughout the year. We've got a really exciting one coming up next week on May 10th. It is called Scale Up. It is specifically focused on our growth stage members or anyone who's interested in learning about growth stage businesses. We have some cool speakers coming. We have some cool panels. Check us out, 1871.com. And thanks for being here, y'all.
And thank you. Okay, so obviously we have our physical venue. We also have our virtual venue. So I'm going to pass it over to Caroline, who I believe will be introducing Sarah from VirBela. Caroline, you got it?
I do.
I apologize. I'm barking a lot right now because the FedEx man is outside. So thank you all for being here. I'm Sarah Segrest. I head up the team that manages the open campus community, and that's where we're hosting the virtual component today. So glad to be partners with VRAR Chicago, the Next Evolution, everyone here. So thank you and welcome, neighbors.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. I appreciate it. Just to let everybody know that my controls for my camera and the screen are not particularly being very quick tonight. I think there's some issues going on with my instance of this, but my camera should be coming here soon. My name is Caroline Dennis. It's really great to be here. And I am a founder and a startup advisor. I have a firm called 2 Degrees, and it's a consulting practice for startup founders, for organizations. And I find actionable ways for people to grow and scale their products and their market share. And my background is originally in higher education and healthcare. And then I became an entrepreneur. Hi, my camera. I'm sorry that it's so slow and delayed. Anyway, I've been involved in the security industry, in XR, in blockchain, and Web3. And I'm really excited to be here with VRAR Chicago. And I feel that it's so important for us to give everyone a sense of what's happening in those industries, and also to bring more women to the table, to bring that equity and investment from the probably less than 2% than it is currently. So thanks so much. Happy to be here. I'm going to turn my camera off because I don't think it's working well. Okay, well, I'd like to take a minute here to help people understand what to expect for the room itself. So we are in this virtual space. We just want you to be aware of a couple of things. So you'll notice that there are 3 screens. The left one where we have the camera that goes on and off, the middle one with the deck, and then the one on the other side with a live stream of what's happening. We do ask that people mute themselves when they're not using the camera. When they're not speaking. And that if you can, if you want to raise your hand, you should have the raise your hand, which I know Matt already tested out. So feel free. If you are having any issues, we're happy to have Sarah here and others. So they're very helpful to help anybody that's having issues with, say, audio or other things. So I would like to also just acknowledge and be able to represent a community that is very dear to my heart. It's XR Women. We have over 700 women who are in and out of the XR industry, but hundreds of women who are working in all aspects of AR, VR, and XR. And we actually are having a very special event coming up at AWE, May 30th to June 3rd. We're going to be having the XR Women Awards, where we're going to be awarding 3 women with Innovation Trailblazer Awards, and we're really excited about it. We've actually held over 200 events in the last 2 years. So excited about that. And I will turn it back to you now, Matt.
Thank you very much. And with that, yes, I just want to mention, like I said, there's a lot of organizations that make this happen. We work with Vennity, we work with 2 Degrees, Independent Game Developers Association, chapter of Chicago, 2112, which is Chicago's creative technology incubator, NVZN, where's Ron? There he is, and VRML, VR Motion Learning. One of the things that, again, we brought up, this is a little bit new for us, but we're doing it this year. We're giving it a try. I'm putting this QR code up on the screen. We have NFTs that are collectible at these events. It's just one of those things. This one will have a purpose, though. Every one of these NFTs that gets collected, and I'll show this again towards the end of the event. It'll be up on the screen, so don't, I would definitely try to snap it now. You can, in VirBela, you can actually just point your camera at that screen. It should read as well. The reason I'm bringing this up, though, is because with these NFTs, you can only collect it tonight, and I believe maybe into tomorrow. For those of you watching the live stream, you can collect it as well. It does not allow you to download after today and tomorrow, and every one of these NFTs that gets collected at a live VRAR Chicago event, towards the end of the year, we're going to do a drawing, probably for something like, say, a VR headset. And essentially every NFT is an entry. It's a ticket for the drawing. That's how that's working. So again, partnering with Vennity for that. But with that, enough about us. Let's actually talk to the folks who you are here to hear from. And with that, I think I'm going to pass it over to Caroline to introduce
Dr. Shawna Pandya. Absolutely. Well, we're so excited to have Shawna. Shawna is an astronaut candidate, an aquanaut, an emergency medicine physician who is doing so many things in the XR space. She comes to us from Canada. Shawna, we're so happy to have you tonight. Welcome. If you want to turn on your camera, we would love to meet you and hear from you.
I should be unmuted now, and we'll see if my camera turns on. All right, there we go. We should be live. You can see and hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay, so we'll get my slides loaded up, and I will spend a quick few minutes telling you who I am and about my work in space and immersive medicine. That should be on the middle screen, yeah? Perfect. Okay. So as you heard, my name is Dr. Shawna Pandya. Next slide, please. I wear more than a few hats. I am a physician, a scientist, astronaut to date, an aquanaut, a skydiver. I'm a pilot in training. And that was my work in the extreme environment was actually my entry into the immersive space. Next slide, please. And so when I was doing my first ever aquanaut mission, we did a lot of cool science. So this was the Neptune Aquanaut mission in 2019, and everything in the exploration and space and science worlds is an acronym, and Neptune is no different. So Neptune stands for Nautical Experiments in Physiology, Technology, and Underwater Exploration. And one of the payloads we were testing was through a Canadian company called Luxsonic. And this was the world's first, next slide please, digital twin of the radiology workspace. So everything that a radiologist needs to read an image, whether it's an MRI, X-ray, or CT scan, typically takes up a lot of physical space and high resolution monitor. So if you're in a resource limited location that doesn't have the space or the infrastructure or the funds to provide that high resolution setup, you can't read until we created this digital twin called Sievert. And so I was lucky enough to be the crew medical officer on that mission. And if we go back one slide, you can see that on the left there, I've donned this headset. I'm in this virtual space, and I linked up with the head of radiology in Saskatoon, Canada. And I was able to collaborate and review the image of a simulated trauma patient in that virtual space over 4,600 kilometers away from the Florida Keys. And so that was the foray. I thought it was just a one-off of a very cool technology. And then given my space background, a couple of months later, well, actually, I get ahead of myself. Let's go to the 2 slides ahead, please. The very next week after that Aquanaut mission, we were lucky enough to test that same piece of technology in 0G on a parabolic flight, what some of you may have heard of referred to as the vomit comet. So if you're not familiar with the concept, when you're flying in a parabola in an aircraft, you're falling at the same rate of the aircraft, and you can generate 20 seconds of 0G at a time. So we were able to take this sweep both under the water and in 0G. And so I thought this was a very cool experience. And then a few months later at the Canadian Space Agency's Space Health Forum, I was formally asked to come on board the company as the VP of Immersive Medicine and bring my remote, rural, and austere environment not just to the space sector, but to do some good for Earth, which we'll talk about in the next few slides. Since then, we've also taken our technology to EVA spacesuit testing. So that's that other picture you see there. The first one is my teammate Heidi testing the suite in 0G on your right. And then the picture on the left is me a couple weeks ago in Florida testing our technology in an extravehicular activity spacesuit, the kind you see on spacewalks. So since then, next slide, please, we've gone on to create medical virtual reality modules for astronauts on long duration missions for the Canadian Space Agency, because typically a crew medical officer on a mission has about 40 to 60 hours of training. So imagine you first trained to put an IV into a patient on the Earth, and then you haven't been called to use that skill until 9 months later. Without practice, those skills, that muscle memory is going to deteriorate, and your poor patient will look like a pincushion. But what if you could maintain that muscle memory for high-risk procedures in VR? So that's what we did. This is a snapshot through one of our lunar modules, again, created for the Canadian Space Agency. And it's not just space that we address through our work. So next slide, please. One question you might be asking is, sure, that's great, Shawna, but what does the ISS have in common with a scenario that I would say all of us have become familiar with through over the past 3 years, whether we wanted to or not, and that is work from home. And next slide, please. I would argue that pandemic life is an austere environment. It is resource limited. Through the pandemic, many of us lost access to our traditional physical learning and work space. And so,
Shawna?
Yeah.
Sorry, can you just slightly turn down your volume just a little bit? And I think it's just
Sure.
because in person it's a little loud. It's great here, but yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
How is this now?
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you. And so next slide, please. So whether we're talking about working in the remote and rural environment of space or work from home, losing access to our physical and traditional learning and workspaces doesn't mean we have to lose access to the quality of training and simulation when it comes to hands-on procedural skills. So aside from space, we've gone on to create virtual reality modules for paramedics. This is a snapshot from one of our airway modules. We've worked for medical laboratory technicians, search and rescue. You can skip 2 slides ahead. The next video won't play. And so when I talk about bringing benefit from the best of what we've done in humanity as explorers, as a species, as astronauts going to space, there's also a lot of benefit to be done for those most in need on this planet. And so when we look at what percentage of humanity lives rural, lives away from the bells and whistles of a tertiary care hospital, who may not have access to that radiology workspace, it's nearly half the world's population. Slide, please. So when we talk about the benefit and the power of immersive technologies, virtual reality, augmented reality, there is a lot of good to be done both in space and on Earth, both through bringing accessibility for diagnostic imaging, bringing accessibility for training and certification. And next slide, it starts with a single step. So thank you very much for having me here today. I am so excited to foster the discussion and hear the next questions. And if you want to get in contact with me, next slide, please. Happy to hear from you. So thank you very much and looking forward to the rest of today.
That's awesome, Shawna. Thank you so much. I'd love to ask you a couple questions as a follow-up to that. So you were recently on a guest for a panel for South by Southwest, and you were discussing, the topic was actually sex in space. It was, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. I can put a link to the chat in it to that post. But I'm curious because with the rise, obviously, of the commercialization of space, which you had talked about at length, Blue Origin, SpaceX, why is it important to research human sexuality and reproduction in space now?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, a lot of my other research in space and extreme environments focuses on reproduction and sexuality, resilience in space, and the health of the average astronaut who might be a commercial space, or what the health of the average person who might choose to go to space, how that might turn out in space. So to your question, Caroline, it's the answer is multifold. So when we look at the rise of commercial space, as you say, since 2021, we have seen a golden age of accessibility to space. We have seen Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic, SpaceX send humans both orbital and suborbital. And so with the rise of access to space and this rise of this industry called space tourism, we might understand that, it's not simply for professional reasons and exploration and science, but for leisure as well. And, we know what people do in hotels on Earth. So definitely if people are going to space for leisure, and if sexuality is going to be part of that, we need to know that it is safe. If a human can conceive in space on one of these trips, what are the risks? We know that there's decades of data from insect studies, mammalian studies, jellyfish studies that suggest at best the data is conflicting. And some of my colleagues from that panel have just put out a paper this week that was actually mentioned on Jimmy Kimmel about the risks of conception in space. And, it comes with a big cautionary exclamation mark that, we don't know. So maybe we should really strongly recommend that we can explore sexuality in space, but we should highly recommend contraception. So that's the immediate term concern. And then there's, a joke in the space industry that says the dinosaurs didn't have a space program. Where are they now? And so there's an argument that space exploration is a survival imperative. And if, we don't want to put 8 billion human eggs in one planetary basket, we should explore having permanent off-world settlements. And settlements imply being multi-generational and procreating in gravity environments other than 1G on Earth. So we do, if we're concerned about the survival imperative, then we really should invest in the science to know how humans will develop and adapt in other gravity environments.
That's a whole other topic that I think would be so interesting. Is just about our planet and sustainability here. And it's amazing that we're even having these conversations. So I happened to notice there was a Forbes article a couple of years ago where it was shining a light on women space entrepreneurs developing innovations for space flight. And of course, in the US, we've seen women leaders, women who led places like Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Aerojet Rocketdyne. But we still see the same sort of shocking percentages when it comes to investment of women-led startups. Do you think that this is going to change in any significant way in the next, say, 5 to 10 years? And if so, why?
I think it already is changing, but we can't take it for granted. And I would say the composition of today's panel is a perfect example. I'm really honored and humbled to be here alongside Emily and Elsa. And I think it's a great start, but we can't take for granted that because we have little progress, we've made a little bit of progress, that we've made it. I really am a fan of the saying that goes, you can be the first, but just don't be the last. So, I'm always really happy to explore really unconventional career paths. I'm thrilled to be doing what I'm doing, but I think so a bit of a imperative to bring others with us on this journey, because some of us do it for the love of the game, and some of us want to do it but don't know that there's a role for us. So I firmly believe in making space for ourselves, pun intended, but also uplifting others along the way.
I love that. So what's next for Luxsonic?
Well, I am really excited. There's some big things happening. So as of this past Friday, we are thrilled to announce that we have been named as one of 5 finalists in the Canadian Space Agency's Deep Space Healthcare Challenge. So one of our solutions, which is both innovative implications for deep space travel as well as remote and rural medicine, will be moving on to the final round. And then very coolly, I have an upcoming Astronaut mission over the next 2 weeks. We'll be heading back underwater and we'll be doing some more testing with Luxsonic. So big things are afoot. I'm very excited and sometimes in disbelief that this is what I get.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Shawna. We're so happy that you're here. Thanks again. Okay, well, if you want to turn off your camera, then we will, I'd like to introduce our next speaker.
Emily Apollonio. And Emily, if you would like to go ahead and share your camera on the left screen and let me know if that works out for you. I know for my camera, it was a little bit of a lag tonight.
Sure. Okay. I think it should be taking over. Okay. Can you see me?
Fabulous. Fabulous. Well, let me just take a minute here. For those of you who are here with us tonight. Oh, if you can mute right now. Sorry about that, Emily.
Sorry.
So Emily is founder of Interstellar Performance Labs. And I know you're going to want to know what that is, and she's going to explain all about it. A human factors consultant, a CrossFit expert, and an analog astronaut. So I was so thrilled to get in touch with you, Emily, and we're excited to have you. So welcome.
Emily, you just have to unmute.
Yeah, you're good.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay. No worries.
Okay. I can't seem to see my slides.
Okay. So if you want to go up to the top and zoom into that middle screen.
I can see
there you are. And you might be, so were you able to go up to the screen and zoom on the middle screen, not the one that you're speaking on?
So I'm on the middle screen and it looks like I see myself.
I don't see it either.
Interesting.
Does anyone see slides in the center screen? Nobody else sees. Yeah,
Oh,
we're not
that's
seeing it either.
interesting.
Slide is just next slide.
Next
Okay.
slide. Good.
There we go.
There you go. Do you see it now,
Okay.
Emily?
Yes, I do.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So my name is Emily Apollonio. I am the founder and director of Analog Astronaut Performance. Interstellar Performance Labs is my company, and I'm actually relatively new to the space industry. And with my company, I am applying a lot of my experience as an aircraft accident investigator, human factors expert, and physical fitness for isolated, confined, and extreme environments into what I now call my passion. So next slide.
Hey, Emily, I
Yes.
don't see, and maybe that's my computer, but I don't see your camera anymore for some reason. Does
Okay.
everyone else, and is it only me?
No.
But I think I didn't need it. I was loving listening to Emily's voice, so.
Oh, I
I think it'd be
know,
okay.
I know.
Yeah.
I was just curious,
There's
Emily.
a patch tonight that might be giving us some hiccups, so we.
Okay,
keep
that's
pushing through.
okay. And Emily, do you have your camera on?
I do, yes.
Okay, all right, well, just keep going. We're excited about that. Sorry about that, folks.
That's okay. Sorry, you can't see my face, but hopefully you
It's
can see me.
okay, it's okay.
And we'll continue with the PowerPoint. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So my background, as I mentioned, I don't have a large space background. I recently started in that. It kind of evolved. I was a CrossFit athlete for quite some time. I did it very competitively and became a CrossFit coach. I was really into the physical aspects of really understanding the power that we had over what we can do with our bodies and how powerful it actually is through physical fitness, but also through the mindset and the mental fitness. So while I was doing that, I was getting my master's degree in human factors, and I specifically focused on aviation and aerospace, and also these high risk, high stress situations. And then I went on to study at the International Space University Space Studies program. And that's kind of where I found my love for space. And how I was introduced to that was I graduated at the end of the pandemic with my master's degree, and I was also doing aircraft accident investigation. And it wasn't really my passion. And I thought, you know, what's next? What am I going to do next? Because this isn't what I love to do. And obviously it was the pandemic. So there wasn't a lot of people hiring. Everybody was kind of just designed in their own homes, sort of say. And so I was introduced to the International Space University by a professor who was kind of trying to help me figure out what that path might look like for me. So I looked into it. I went to France for an entire summer, and I got to study alongside some really incredible humans. And we talked a lot about human performance in space. And that's where I kind of heard this term analog astronaut. And I was like, what is this? This sounds so interesting, so cool, but what is it? And there was actually a few friends of mine that were getting involved in these analog missions, and they were asking me some questions just because of my background, asking me some questions about physical performance and the mental performance and some human factor stuff. And they had a lot of things kind of going wrong during submission. And so we started talking about it. And the more we talked about it, the more interested I was into, oh, if we could go back one more slide, we're not here yet. So I started talking about, how we maybe, I was so interested that there was no training program or nothing to really prepare these individuals for going into these environments. So I guess I should kind of step back for a second and tell you what these analog missions are and what analog astronauts are. And Shawna mentioned the Aquanaut missions, and those are essentially, they are field tests underwater. And we actually have a bunch of these independent analog habitats across the world to kind of replicate or simulate these environments across the planetary surface. A lot of them can bring opportunities for different types of research, whether it's geological sampling or maybe team dynamics or biology, or even telecommunications and different electronic systems. So we use these analogs kind of as test beds to see how are we going to operate in space and kind of help figure out the research that might go into that. So there's a lot that are doing these analog missions, and I said, you know what, this is really interesting that there's no training, and I think I could really help provide some insight into this with my experience and background. And so we'll go to the next slide, please. So I learned more by reaching out to some people who were involved in the Analog Astronaut Conference. And one of the best tips that I ever got from a mentor a long time ago was, if you want to go to a conference or you want to be more involved in an industry, then volunteer. So that's exactly what I did. I reached out to some of the organizers, and they said, yes, absolutely, come help us volunteer. And I got to know a little bit more about this industry. And at the same time, I had applied for a mission as well, where I was selected, and I got to go spend 30 days at High Seas. And High Seas is an analog habitat that is in Hawaii. It is situated at the top of a volcano, the one that recently erupted and luckily did not harm, thank goodness, but I got to stay there. So I was there last year right before the conference. And so this was the moment where I kind of felt like all of my worlds were kind of colliding for the best. So after my mission, the reason I did that was to really kind of understand how these people feel, how they act, what they actually go through during these missions. And I was really able to gain some valuable insight into that. And so right after my mission, I got to go to the Analog Astronaut Conference, where I ended up being a co-host there and talking with the community about the need for human performance training for these environments. And that is essentially when my company was born. So just a year ago is when I launched my company. And ironically enough, this conference was at Biosphere last year. And ironically enough, I just arrived here today for our second Analog Astronaut Conference. So it's really exciting for me to be here right now. So that's when my company was born. And if we'll go to the next slide, please. Now, since then, we have worked with 4 organizations and 5 specific missions to help prepare them for these isolated, confined, and extreme environments. And up at the top here, this picture is one of my crews that I worked with. It was the Chill Ice mission. They actually spent 7 days, about 160 meters into a lava tube. So I got to work with them for about 8 weeks and help really physically and mentally prepare for this environment. And that was really exciting for me. We have also done, we launched our first cohort of what we call the Stellar Training for Astronaut Readiness program, where we teach basically the essentials of physical, mental, team performance, and human factors. And so we are actually the very first of its kind in any human performance training for analog missions and analog astronauts. And we are now about to work with the world's biggest analog, which is going to be basically simulating multiple colonies on one planetary surface operating an analog at the same time. So we will be providing training for all of those crews. So that's where we're at now. And thank you guys so much for having me here.
I think that's such a great story, and also just a way for other people who are new to these industries of how you can enter them. And it sounds like you really put yourself out there and made huge strides in a pretty short amount of time. So I wanted to ask you, you were talking about your training and you've done some work with SAM habitat in the biosphere too, which I know that you had said that you are there now. Can you give us a little bit more sense of how that actually unfolds? How is that actually done? And maybe some of the translation around some of the terms here in case there are people that don't know.
Yeah, so I mentioned a little bit about what the analog astronauts are, and kind of something that Shawna pointed out as well is, we're about to go into this commercial space industry where we're going to be, or commercial tourism, space tourism, where we're going people to space eventually who don't necessarily meet NASA or ESA's physical or mental health criteria. And so when we do these analog missions, this is really actually a great test bed to figure out, what does this look like when we put the everyday human in these types of environments and isolate them from everything that they know is essentially comfortable in their home. So that's kind of the future of what that looks like. And yes, we did just work with a crew who went into the SAM habitat here at Biosphere. This was actually the very first mission here at Biosphere in 30 years. I will say, disclaimer, it was not actually in Biosphere, but it was in a very new habitat. It's going to be one of the state-of-the-art research facilities. It has some pretty incredible technologies. But when we worked with this crew, a lot of their research was inclusivity. This was the very first mission that we included someone with visual impairment, so 100% visually impaired member of the crew was on this mission. And so we did a lot of work on communication and understanding different types of workload that everybody experiences and how that's very subjective because what you might feel is very mentally demanding, someone else might feel is more frustrating or physically demanding. So we did do a lot of virtual training where we looked at communication and workload and team cohesion and things like that. So
that's incredible. Well, you actually might have answered my second question, which was really about how human performance and fitness is going to take shape. I guess really quickly, if you could share, if you're talking about doing a project where you're training a larger group of people, if that's what I'm understanding correctly, or if maybe that's being done in phases, are those things happening in headset, and will they for you, or are you exploring that as the next sort of possibility?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So we are looking at the use of virtual reality, augmented reality to kind of bring together these habitats during the world's biggest analog, because they will be located in Poland and Spain and the US, all over the world. And so the way that we can kind of create this cohesiveness in this community, which is essentially what we're doing, we will need to kind of start bringing in some of these types of technologies and provide some of this training. And the other thing I'll kind of say, going back to what you had kind of asked me a second ago, is the physical element. And I don't know how many people out here currently do exercise and what their motivations are, but we all know that when we do exercise, exercise releases these chemicals in our body that makes us just feel good mentally. It kind of helps clear out some headspace. And so when we're in these stressful environments, in these isolated and confined environments, and we're with the same people all the time, exercise can be one of the greatest medicines. And so when we're able to really move properly to avoid injuries and things like that, we can have a more effective experience in doing something like that through virtual reality with these crews, whether it's a small crew or like on a small scale, or if it's with a very large crew where we're talking maybe 60 to 100 people across the world doing an analog mission.
Incredible. Well, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that, Emily. We'll have time for questions after these other two guests, but I'll send it back to you, Matt.
Thank you very much. And up next, we have our third presenter from Level X, Dr. Elsa Varghese. She's gonna come and join me on the stage here. But while she's coming up here, I will say she is a physician and a researcher by training, a senior manager at Level X in Chicago, and who is the world's leading video gaming studio, where is it Varghese? Excellent. Leads clinical strategy and clinical accuracy. All yours.
So much. Can everybody hear me? All right. So thank you so much, Caroline and Matt, for especially having me here. I'm incredibly excited to be talking about what Level X is doing in the realm of space tech. So go ahead and next slide. One more. We'll go ahead and skip over. So a little bit about me and my role. So right now I'm the senior manager of the medical department at Level X. And what that means is utilizing my clinical background as a physician, my role is to understand the challenges and knowledge gaps that are presented to us by our clients as well as our healthcare professionals. And the way that I do that is I work with an incredible team coming from various backgrounds, starting with biomedical engineers, other clinicians, pharmacists and nurses, and not to mention our engineering, game design, and developmental team. Slide, please. So a little bit about Level X. What do we do? In a nutshell, we create video games for physicians. The way that we do that is along the lines of what I said before, which is we take a challenge, game spin on it, and then provide it to a player so that they can play it in a risk-free and fun and challenging environment. We've also worked with 20 of the 40 major pharmaceutical and device companies, one of them also being NASA. So, how are we doing? Our visual, hyper-realistic visuals and our visual fidelity has gained a little bit of traction. We have over 1 million healthcare professionals playing our games, and we have over 3 million app downloads. This goes to show that we've also innovated relatively heavily in the clinical space, and we're disrupting the way that we approach traditional medicine. So how do we do it? We utilize something called the neuroscience of play. So imagine you finally get that impossible shot that you were looking for. Beat that really difficult level in that game. Your adrenaline surges, your dopamine goes up, your heart races, and your senses are heightened. And your brain etches that skill into your memory. Level X uses advanced game mechanics and tech to hone in on that and create lasting mental models and trigger happy pathways. So we decided to measure some of the outcomes. Studies were done to show actual improvement in real-life clinical case scenarios. We also did an independent study in collaboration where we targeted busy, experienced, and older physicians, and we saw that 40% of physicians improved their performance not only in their game, but also in real-life clinical case scenarios outside of the game later. 75% of the physician players also prefer to learn through play instead of the traditional CME route. Slide, please. All right, so now we're gaining a little bit of traction. We're getting noticed. In 2019, we started collaborating with Trish and NASA, build a fundamental and foundational medical training platform where it could be used in flight and pre-flight. This led to our real-time ultrasound sim training that we built. We also built a human virtual anatomy library where we showcase some of the conditions that you can come across in space, like atrial fibrillation, where your heart is not beating normally, and also SANS, which is spaceflight associated neuroocular syndrome. We also have a library of therapeutic management approaches that astronauts can utilize based off of what's available on board. Next slide, please. Fast forward to the current work that we're doing with Trish and NASA. Our collaboration was incredibly successful to the point where now we've extended our partnership. And we're now focusing on building the fundamentals of ultrasound. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the slide while we go into the video. Oh, the video. Oh, unfortunate. Okay, well, we'll give a preview a little bit later, but it's giving you a better understanding of how we're building out the tech. So the ultrasound tech that we're building, our team is working incredibly hard on not only build it out and refine it, but also to build anatomical structures from almost scratch. We're then taking those structures and teaching our end users and training them the fundamentals of ultrasound. And specifically assessing, we're going to start with the assessment of IJV, or internal jugular vein. So to get a better understanding, internal jugular vein is especially important in astronauts because of documented cases of thrombosis or clots that have formed in their neck veins. This is risky because this could potentially dislodge and go up into the brain. What we're using is an incremental approach to how astronauts can take accurate ultrasound images for assessment. The way that we're doing that is starting simple. Starting as simple as placing an object in front of the probe, and then you get to visualize what it actually looks like. We'll ask the trainer to then increase the complexity by placing another object in front of another probe, then also teach how much pressure, what's the rotation of the probe, and what is the pitch that is required to get the most adequate image. No, not this one. Goal. So, how do we also create additional complexity? We will then take those objects and then put it into human anatomical structures where there's various tissue structures and also different types of anatomy. Then that leads you to IJV assessment. The tech that we're creating is revolutionary in potentially training astronauts. This also has terrestrial implications because it has utilization in POCUS, which is point-of-care ultrasound utilized in hospitals and clinics, also in combat medicine for triage. Our next steps and our goal is to immerse this into AR and VR experience, but also put it on our remote play platform, which allows for one astronaut or physician to log in from one side of the country to then collaborate with another astronaut or physician on the other side of the world. This has the potential to standardize how we train physicians and astronauts globally. Thank you.
Awesome. That was so awesome. Thanks.
So I'm actually going to stop real quick. I want to just ask one question just because it wasn't clear. What is TRISH?
TRISH stands for Translational Research Institute of Space Health.
Thank you.
So many acronyms. Pandya had said.
Okay, so I have a couple questions for you. Give me a couple seconds. So one of the things, I'm just going to actually ad-lib a little bit here. One of the things, obviously, which was hoping to speak over a video for about that last slide there. There's a lot of technology that goes into making this event happen live, virtual, and streamed at the same time. And so when we can't get videos ahead of time, that's why we can't do that sort of stuff. We can't at this point we are limited in that we can't play things off YouTube. We can't play things off embedded slides. It's one of the things we try to accommodate, but there's just a lot of tech that goes into this.
Oh, I could totally imagine.
And playing in 3 spaces at once. But that said, given the popularity of the medical training games that your company's built, how do you see gaming and VR changing, say, the higher education industry, especially with respect to traditional medical school modalities?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question because the value is high. And you can actually see a lot of the implementation currently taking place. And you can see even a shift of thinking with industry. Starting to realize the way that you're training physicians for future doctors or future physicians needs to start at the graduate level or at the student level. And the way that you can do that is start immersing them in tech and providing them a risk-free environment where they can actually train instead of actually going directly on patients. So I think the utilization is huge, the value is high, the bar that we can set is also relatively high, and that's one of the things we're actually working with is partnering with university levels to make sure we have the ability to actually implement some of these across their curriculum.
Well, and just given that you mentioned kind of like going earlier and earlier in the cycle there, do you think that this would also potentially be like a recruiting tool for like maybe high school students who are looking into medicine?
Yes, so that's a really fantastic thing because we have done multiple job fairs and multiple career fairs. And one of the things that we actually utilize is our AR and our VR tech. And we have noticed the way to get attention is actually to bring some of these techs on board. And when you show the capability of what it actually can do, but you also show what the education and value you can provide is, you'll see an uptick in people that are actually very interested. Huge for high schoolers. This is huge for people who want to go into medicine or even into industries that actually have immersive tech involved.
Thank you. And you touched on this a little bit, but I do want to ask and kind of point, obviously given the event and the focus here, with the increasing move towards augmented reality and mixed reality, can you share how you see this changing what products you're building and how you're building at Level X?
Yeah, so it's game changing. So primarily when we're focusing on space tech, we are focusing on more utilization, but also having the ability to reach it more effectively, meaning mobile apps are more friendly to be utilized. Everybody has access. The accessibility is high, but you get a much different experience if you actually have VR and AR technology involved. So we are actually currently working on implementing not just specialty-based like ultrasound, but actually anatomical structures that you can manipulate in AR and VR and understand what the ramifications are when it comes to space, how does that activate the spine, go through actual use cases in that risk-free environment. And that is one of our amazingly projected projects that we're actually going into for 2023 and 2024.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And again, I'm going to point out, unfortunately, for those of you in the virtual and the streaming audience, you don't get to realize that they actually have a Magic Leap augmented reality demonstration here in the physical space that the people here get to try out. But with that said, thank you very much. We can give you another round of applause if you'd like, and we're going to move on to our next presenter.
Thank you.
So with that, I will toss it back to Caroline in VirBela.
Sure, and I just wanted to point out before we have Elsa sit down is that we do have a MP4 file that I did share in the general chat here to make sure that it went through all right. But if you look in the public chat, Tom, you can also take a look at that as well because people can watch that video after the fact. So terrific. So I'm going to actually see if I can get my camera to actually turn on here. Oh, great. It's working now. Hopefully it's not too slow. Hi, everybody. So I'd like to introduce Brian Barnett. I reached out to Brian a couple of weeks ago because I actually, he was part of my network. I lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico for almost 20 years because I ran and founded two companies. Brian is quite a combination of talents, and I'm thrilled that he's here. He is a serial entrepreneur. He's had over 36 years in civil and commercial space. He is also a super talented drummer, which I can imagine those creatives and entrepreneurial minds go very, very well together. He's been building this company, and I'm super excited to have him here, hailing from my former land of enchantment, New Mexico. So welcome, Brian. If you want to go ahead and turn on your camera, I'll turn off mine.
So thank you, Caroline, and I turned my camera on already. Can everybody see me?
Not yet.
Not yet. So if you are you're at the left screen with the one that you're trying to turn on, the one that's sitting, that you're in back of. And you clicked on that little camera icon, that share webcam button.
Yes, I have.
Okay, and does it have a little hesitation and then takes a little bit of time and then says, do you want to share your webcam?
Yeah, it says that, and so I can see myself, but
That's okay. Why don't we just go ahead? That's fine.
Yeah, we can hear you.
No worries. All right,
Um,
well, welcome. Your slides are up. Can you see your slide in the middle there? If you do a Zoom screen, you can zoom to that middle screen and then you should see your slide deck there.
yes, I can see it. So
Terrific.
thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks so much, Caroline. And I'm so happy to be here with everybody and appreciate the invite. And I'm honored to be on the same stage, per se, with all these impressive colleagues who have spoken for me. So I'm founder and CEO of a company called Solstar Space Company, and we are best known as the company that is doing the first commercial Wi-Fi in space. And we flew into space a couple years ago on Blue Origin's New Shepard rocket, which is the company that's owned by Jeff Bezos, and you see on TV quite a bit, sending up celebrities, and they go to space and come back down. So anyway, we had a Wi-Fi hotspot inside of that capsule, and we had an internet connection to the spacecraft as well using satellites. And then we posted the first ever commercial tweet for space. So if you were watching our Twitter feed that day, you would have seen the tweet come through. And about myself, I have been in the space and satellite industries my entire career. So I started at NASA, and I actually worked in astronaut training. So I worked with the astronauts before they flew to get them familiar with the experiments that they were going to be conducting while in space. And I actually had a number of experiments that flew into space on the space shuttle. And then I wanted to get into this area called commercial space, which is what we see is just really taking off today. And so I studied science, but I also studied business, and then joined a consulting firm called KPMG during the 90s, and we did all the business plans and commercial assessments for anything that had to do with commercial space or satellites. And then I'm a serial entrepreneur. I started my first satellite company in 1999. And so Solstar is my third company. And yes, I've also been a professional drummer throughout my life. And
Excuse me,
actually given.
did you want to have him advance your slides? Sorry, I didn't remind you to do that if you want him to do that.
I'm just going to keep it on this one just for a little bit longer.
Sure, sorry about that. I just want to make sure
okay.
we were doing that for you. Great.
And so I've started giving a lecture on playing the drums in space, playing the drum set in space without gravity. And hopefully I'll have the chance to fly in space and take my drumsticks at least. But Solstar Space, we are basically working on something called the Space Wide Web, and then connecting that to the World Wide Web. So our products and services connect people on Earth to things and people in space. And so I have not worked myself in immersive technology specifically, but I believe that Solstar's internet and space and Wi-Fi is a really good enabling technology that can really play a big part in AR and VR in the future, and just connecting people on Earth to space basically through the internet. So can you move to the next slide, please?
You see that okay, Brian?
I'm having trouble seeing it now, but that's okay. So where can we use internet in space and Wi-Fi in space? So you can use it inside of spacecraft, like on the left. So you have these spacecraft that are flying tourists in space more and more. So you have Virgin Galactic, and you have Blue Origin, and basically our capabilities provide in-flight Wi-Fi and internet. So similarly to how I'm sure a lot of you have used Wi-Fi on airplanes. So basically, it's the same thing that you log into the Solstar hotspot, and then you're connected to the internet, and then we charge you a fee for that service. And so internet for astronauts on board, but also experiments. And then in low Earth orbit, you have space stations, and so just the astronauts on board need internet and Wi-Fi inside the space stations, but also outside space stations, because when you're doing a spacewalk, actually, then the astronauts can use Wi-Fi while they're doing the space walks. But also besides astronauts, then you can also have the Wi-Fi to connect. If your experiment in space is Wi-Fi enabled, then that experiment can again log into the Solstar hotspot on board, and then you're connected to the internet. So this really helps out with scientists on Earth who need to interact with their payloads, their experiments from Earth. And I really think that having a good Wi-Fi connection, an internet connection, and then also I think this is where some of the augmented reality can come into place, to where the scientists on the ground can really improve their science returns if they have this internet service from their lab on Earth. Same thing with physicians on Earth, just being able to interact with the astronauts virtually. And so anyway, that's the type of thing that our technology can enable. Then we've also started working in the lunar environment. You may know that we're returning to the moon. So the program's called Artemis, and so the first woman, for instance, is going to be going to the moon here in the coming years, which I'm really excited about. And so one of the pieces of this Artemis is the Lunar Gateway space station, which is a space station that NASA is working on now to launch in a few years. That it will orbit the Earth. Sorry, it will orbit the moon. So that's the photograph, the one third from the left. That's the Lunar Gateway space station. And so we have been working under contract to Northrop Grumman to build the Wi-Fi access nodes that would be mounted inside of the crew habitat module there. You can see that in the middle. That's where the astronauts will be staying. And so providing the Wi-Fi inside that, but also outside of that space station as well. Same thing, just Wi-Fi enabled payloads and experiments and sensors inside the space station and outside the space station. Also providing Wi-Fi for astronauts inside and outside the space station. And then we have been, because of the fact that, there's not really a lot of companies that have done Wi-Fi in space before, besides us. And so we're getting a lot of calls now to provide Wi-Fi on the lunar surface, because NASA is funding these human landing systems that will land on the moon. That's where the astronauts they'll land. They can come down from that space station as well. They can dock with the space station, then come down to the moon from that space station. And so NASA is requiring Wi-Fi for those, and for the lunar bases that are also going to be built in that same environment. The same thing. We use internet and Wi-Fi on Earth. Same thing on the moon. So just having Wi-Fi available outside the spacecraft provide Wi-Fi to astronauts, and again to Wi-Fi enabled sensors and instruments and rovers. Like, do you remember the Apollo missions? You remember the lunar rover that the astronauts were lucky enough to have the lunar rover, so they could like drive for miles away from where they landed. It was such a good thing to have if you were going to the moon. And so same thing there. Those lunar rovers need to be Wi-Fi enabled. Next slide. I just wanted to show that my companies, we've been involved with providing satellite internet and Wi-Fi for a long time. This company I spun out in 2017, so we've been a company since then. But before that, after I left NASA, then I started my first satellite communications company in '99, and so we were providing internet on board private jets. Walmart has a fleet of Learjets, a large fleet, and they came to my company. They wanted to track their Learjets over the internet, which today we can go to programs like FlightAware and we can track airplanes very easily. But back then it wasn't available, and so we provided an internet connection on board and then a voice satellite phone for the pilots, and then started getting experimenting going higher and higher to provide satellite internet. And so we flew in a high altitude balloon and sent text messages to it at 100,000 feet, and that worked. And then in 2013, we flew on a rocket for the first time because we didn't know if we could maintain a satellite connection on a rocket going at rocket velocities above in space above Harmon line, and so that worked. And then we flew twice, like I said, on Blue Origin successfully. We had a satellite internet connection from the launch pad all the way up into space, in space, and all the way down. And so, and then on the lower right, that photo there, that's myself and my colleagues and some NASA people and other scientists that had experiments on board. We're all behind Jeff Bezos there. He's kneeling in the middle. Definitely liked the idea of Wi-Fi in space and was asking me a couple questions about how we did that. So I told him a little bit, but not too much. And then, as I mentioned, that we're working on Wi-Fi in the lunar area. So that's my presentation. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
That's fantastic, Brian. Thank you so much. And if you want to, I will turn my camera back on and would love to ask you a couple questions. And while that's doing that, so according to the World Economic Forum, there are around 11,000 satellites that have been launched since Sputnik, and there's an estimated 500 million pieces of junk flying around in space. And according to that report, it's estimated that there are going to be about 7 times that number added over the coming years. So how does your company manage the process of maintenance and repair given these kinds of odds?
So yes, space junk is just a huge current issue that's happening, and I'm happy to say that Solstar, we are part of our culture is taking care of the planet, and so we recycle as much as we can. And I think that in our products, one of our products, we installed onto a satellite and to enable it to send commands up to it to either deorbit, because the FCC has just recently put into place these instructions that you have to, any satellite that's going to be launched has to have a way to bring it down. And so, but also our products can help the operators on Earth to move it out of the way if there is a collision that's coming or a close call, or it looks like it could be a collision, then you can use our technology or internet technology from Earth to, like through your laptop here, to send a command to move the spacecraft out of the way so that we can minimize any more collisions that cause space junk. But it's a very important topic that we take very seriously, and we are also not launching any of our own satellites currently. We use, by the internet services, we use satellites that are already in space. So we're leveraging those versus sending up our own satellite, internet satellites, if that makes sense.
And we talked about that when we had our conversation, that they're smaller satellites, and I understand that there's definitely a move towards smaller satellites in general, just because technologies like 3D printing are enabling there to be cheaper ways to put those satellites up. So I guess one more question I wanted to ask you is, you talked about these extreme environments, and I understand you would have a Wi-Fi unit that sits inside of those space stations and then outside. Can you share about some of the sort of the challenges of designing the gear to be able to withstand these extreme environments and how you test those? Because you kind of have to be there, right? Or can you simulate it?
You can't simulate it. There's test facilities that obviously NASA uses a lot. In any space company that's putting something into space, you have to test it with radiation, but also in extreme temperatures. Because you're right, if our equipment is mounted outside the spacecraft in space or on the moon, for instance, the moon, so you don't have any atmosphere there. So we're so lucky here on Earth. We have this atmosphere that we don't even think about a lot of times, but it's just so fortunate to have it, because besides providing the air that we breathe, it also protects us from the radiation that comes from the sun. And so on the moon, you have the extreme temperatures. So the equipment will see negative 250 to plus 250 degree temperature extremes. If you're in the sun, then it's extremely hot. If you're during the nighttime, which by the way lasts 2 weeks on the moon, then you have to design the equipment to be able to withstand that environment. And then the other challenge is that if your Wi-Fi equipment is on the moon, then it's 238,000 miles away, versus down the hall in our house or in our office, where we can just go over there and reboot it, right? So what we design has to be able to, you have to be able to fix it from Earth, basically. And so that's a real complex software problem that we work on and provide solutions for. You have to, besides fixing it or rebooting it or that sort of thing, then you also have to update it. So being able to send software updates to the equipment from Earth,
Yeah.
Those are some of the things you have to think about.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that answer. And I know we want to make time for the audience questions, but I know that there will be some that will ask about the use cases of XR. And I know you and I talked about that, and that you're currently not using AR and VR, but there's definitely a lot of room for that, especially as you look to maintain your equipment from afar, in addition to some of those visions around having people's automatically have an experience where they're actually in a real-time situation on the moon or through the Wi-Fi network. So love to get into that a little bit with the audience. Well, thank you so much, Brian. That's incredible. And we're so happy to have you here tonight. And I definitely want to make, so let me turn it back to you, Matt.
Thank you very much. And at this point, got a little people in the room class. At this point, I'm going to ask our presenters who are in physical space to come back up to stage because we're going to open it up to the Q&A. So this will be a little bit interesting. So how Q&A is going to work, because we have potentially 3 different environments that questions can come from. So Ben is going to grab a microphone off the table over here. So if you're in the physical space here, raise your hand. Ben will come to you with a microphone. Patrick at the desk has a microphone, and he can read off any questions. He'll basically ping me or wave me down or something if he has any questions for folks from AWE Live. And also in the VirBela space, you can just raise your hand, and Caroline will raise her hand. If I see her hand go up, I know that there's a question in VirBela. So the question is always going to be, who goes first? So I'm looking back between the VirBela space. Patrick, questions there yet? You got a hand up in VirBela, Caroline?
Sorry. Everything in my it's going slow. So. I do have a question.
Go ahead, Robin.
Is that you, Robin, that wanted to ask the question, or am I not able to see the?
Hi, Brian. Sorry, I think my mic was muted. First of all, I'm a bass player, and I have an app called Space Dragon, so we should start a space band because that's the only appropriate thing to say right now. I was curious about network latency because we do immersive technology, XR, VR, MR, and that use case really appeals to me of training people on the live link and that sort of thing. How's that research been there for dealing with network latency?
And I think that was intended for Brian, right?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, excellent question. So obviously the farther away from Earth you are, the more the latency issue is. And I can tell you that when we posted our tweet that day, we were located at the Payload Operations Center in Texas, in West Texas. That's where Jeff Bezos's ranch is, and that's where he launches his the New Shepard from. So we were there. We had a internet connection in the Payload Ops Center there, and so we had to, send the tweet from there in West Texas through the internet up to the ground station, or through the internet to the satellite ground station, which was in Phoenix, and we were in West Texas. Then it went up to the satellite that was nearest to the spacecraft where our equipment was in and the Wi-Fi. So I can tell you that sending the tweet out that way, and then when it posted, it was practically the same speed as how fast it is on Earth. But the farther away you get, then the longer it does take. So there is a delay that you'll have to consider. And so I think you are the gaming experts, and I think that so you have to learn how to use to deal with that. Similar if you're operating a lunar rover on the lunar surface from Earth, then there is there's some seconds delay in doing that, and so you just have to train to do that. And I would like to say
that's awesome. I think it's like for me to plan in that, it's to know like how many seconds, like what's that range? Is it like 2 to 4 seconds or 6 to 8? Like how tight is that range? Because it changes the way that we can design an application. Because 30 seconds is way different than 2.
Yeah. So on the moon, I believe it's in the order of. It's less than, I would say less than. I think it's between 2 and around, this is say 5 seconds round trip, 6 seconds. If others know that exact number here on the stage besides me, then please chime in.
But But Brian, isn't that though, that latency, isn't that just dependent on what it is, the data that's being transmitted up and down? So isn't it also based on what kind of data it is? Like if it's video files, if it's just, it's reports, it's raw data, whatever it is, isn't that sort of dependent on that? Or
Yeah,
are
I
you
mean-
saying that the link, the actual link, the point-to-point link that goes from there to satellite is that small?
So it's traveling at the speed of light, how you determine it. But then, like you said, there are other factors like how big is your pipeline? So if you have a big enough pipeline, like the link back from the moon to Earth, that's large enough for video, which it will be at least for the large programs like NASA is doing, then your pipeline will be large enough to support video. And so then you have at the speed of light, in fact, your network, all the pieces in between Earth and the moon that in terms of transmitting and receiving data, if we just presume that's an ideal pipeline, then you're just talking about the speed of light.
Right.
And yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for that. It's a really,
Just
there's
like
a
on
lot,
Earth,
there's a lot
there's
more.
there's so many factors, right, on Earth as well. All of us know we're professionals in this area, that there's so many factors that are involved with speed.
I can really get amused by some of the stuff that's happening in the chat, by the way, Matt, and for those of you in the in-person space, there's a lot of good chatter about, come on, Google, why can't we, I think we're all at the point where the idea of space tourism is just like rocking it. People are so excited about it, but it does pose so many challenges. So thank you for that. And thank you, Robin, for asking that question. Let's turn it back over to Matt, but feel free in the virtual audience, do raise your hands if you have more questions. I'll turn it back to you, Matt.
Yeah, I'm going to throw one question I have, and it's mostly pointed at the medical professionals, because one of the things that I learned when actually working with human spaceflight support, going to space as a human does things to your body that are, to put it lightly, not pleasant, especially when you spend significant time up there and then come back to Earth. And I'm curious how much of the medical focus of some of the stuff that you guys are dealing with is based on, obviously there's being able to perform when you're in space, being able to do tasks when you're in space, handling any sort of medical conditions that come up, but just the concept of what actually what happens to the human body when they spend significant time in a low gravity. And I was curious if either of you want to just sort of talk to that a little bit, because it's something that, frankly, as somebody who's fascinated with the space program and seen launches and all that sort of stuff, I'd never learned about that until I was actually supporting the pararescuemen who get astronauts out of a capsule when it lands.
I wonder if Shawna, you can take that first stab at it, and then Elsa.
Yeah, happy to take that on. So the one-line summary of why space medicine exists is that space is trying to kill you. And so when we summarize the risks of long-duration spaceflight, we talk about the RIDGE framework. So that stands for radiation, isolation, confinement, distance from Earth. So it's not just for Wi-Fi, but it's also for the latency of communication if you have a medical emergency on Mars. Depending on the alignment of the red planet and Earth, your latency can be 6 to 46 minutes round-trip delay. So if you have a cardiac arrest or a mass trauma, mass hemorrhage or massive trauma, you don't have time to radio back to Earth for help. The G of that RIDGE framework stands for altered environment. So everything from microgravity that astronauts on the International Space Station have to deal with, to increased G loads of launch and landing, to partial gravity on the moon at 17%. And then E kind of stands for everything else. So that's the hostile environments part of spaceflight. So the altered day-night cycles that Brian had alluded to said that's 14 days of day, 14 days of night at the lunar equator. It's one sunrise, sunset cycle every 90 minutes at the level of the International Space Station. And that's just speaking at a high level. So when we get into the nitty-gritty of zero G, our bones lose density, our muscles lose mass. So there's a whole host of considerations. And so coming back to how we can use immersive technologies, for example, when we were building our medical virtual reality training procedures for the Canadian Space Agency, there's actually a list of what we call the top 100 medical conditions that can occur in space. This is based on decades of human spaceflight. It's based on the stuff that is most common, what we know from historical data. And it's also based on the stuff that hasn't happened yet, but that can kill you if it happens. And so we built in these sepsis training scenario that could accommodate a lot of these different medical conditions to be able to time lots of that. So NASA's Johnson Space Center Exploration Medical Capability, they're the ones who came up with this top 100. And there's also a great Wikipedia article about space medicine and what's happened in space flight, but hopefully that's a good primer.
That's fabulous, Shawna. If you don't mind, if you have that list somewhere, if you can locate it and share that in the chat, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel like Dr. Pandya touched on almost everything when it comes to what spaceflight actually is. So she's absolutely correct. I feel like space medicine exists for a reason, and spaceflight is not for the faint of heart either. You have to be very in the know in terms of what you need to do, what will actually happen, and eventually how you could tackle that in space. That's also major. That's where we come in, and that's where our tech is actually utilized. How can we make it easy for astronauts, or how can we actually supplement some of what's actually existing so we can actually reduce the load to training and increase the accessibility, so that if you do come across some level of trauma, if you do come across something that you need to address immediately, they have it at their fingertips. And this needs to apply to not just physician astronauts, we need to make it accessible to non-physician astronauts as well.
Yeah, I just had a question for for the medical, for like different medicines or different things like that. Also, for storing the medications, because some medications, especially like specialty medications and things like that, need to be stored at very almost like a freezer level or refrigerator type temperature and things like that. So like in space, are there other things with the equipment and everything else to make sure that the medications and everything else can be stored, or at least how does being in space affect the storage of those medications, especially for a long time?
Fantastic question. So historically, and Dr. Pandya probably answered this way better than I can, but historically, there's a lot of limitations to what you can actually bring into space. And a lot of it has to do with storage, but also what you can actually take, which is kind of along the lines of like why we're focusing on ultrasound as well, because that's one of the modules that you can actually take into space to assess. So I think it also differs based off of the medical bay and also on the mission, right? So for the Artemis mission, it will most likely be a completely different approach or a completely different set of medications dependent on how long the route is, what's actually being targeted, but they do have a general understanding or general medications at their disposal as needed. And of course, if there's any sort of issues or anything that come up, they will send it up with another payload or another flight. But probably Dr. Pandya can definitely take that question a little bit better than me.
Yeah, well, that was an excellent introduction. And so the addition to build on that is we're still learning at every single step. So what Elsa, Dr. Varghese said earlier in her presentation about the jugular venous thrombosis, that's a
relatively new finding as of 2019. So as much as we know, we're still learning. So the challenges with medications in space, partially we know some of those, and those are the design constraints of packing for space. So what we bring with us, it's like, we call it the backpacking principle. You can only bring so much with you on your backpack when you go on a hike, and the same is true for space. Your mass, power, volume limited, the astronaut time is at a premium, so it has to be easy to use, low training, and it has to have a long shelf life and be hardy in a high radiation, zero-G environment. So that's the part we know. And then pharmacodynamics, pharmacokinetics, as in how does that individual Tylenol tablet withstand itself in the radiation environment, in the zero-G environment compared to an Earth environment? And then also, how does the physiology of the body, how does the first pass metabolism, if that's how a drug is metabolized, how does that change in this high stress environment? So that's part of it. And then if something like Tylenol or amoxicillin has a lower shelf life, maybe it's more efficient to print something in situ, especially if you're on a Mars mission and your resupply is every year. So there's so many considerations. So for those of you who are would-be innovators in the audience, this is an area that's ripe for innovation. And then one of the cool parts about pharmaceuticals is crystal growth and microgravity. Crystals are more symmetrical, they're bigger, so that's a promising area of research. So yeah, it's really an interesting question. Some things that we know about, but a lot still to be discerned.
Thanks, Shawna. I think, Matt, did you have a question from AWE.live?
Go ahead, Patrick.
Hello? Okay, yeah, this one comes from Francis. I'm not sure if I'm phrasing this exactly right, but I think what they're asking is, they said that in the Matrix movie, they can compress time and immerse the user in an experience. And they're wondering if there's anyone in the panel that's been thinking about that, how possible that might be, and how far away we might be from that, and whether that's even accomplishable. Trying to ask is, like when he learns how to fly like a helicopter, that kind of thing.
I'm dancing at the pure thought of that, you guys.
Well, I mean, it's,
oh no.
Let's try to take as much out of this as we can, though. So basically, you're talking about brain-computer interface, which is, there are products you can go buy now that will effectively read brain signals. And I'm trying to remember, I know we had a panelist, I believe, I'm trying to remember what it was. It was in one of the medical conversations we had. But what they were doing is they were using BCI, brain-computer interface, along with virtual reality to effectively train somebody to use a robotic artificial limb that would actually be controlled by BCI. And so, the effectively, it was simulation. It was VR-based simulation, brain-computer interface. So obviously, we can already, to a certain degree, read brain signals and use that to control both happening in a virtual environment and what's happening in a physical environment. In terms of how quickly you would be able to compress time to train somebody faster to become a ninja, I don't know if that's going to work too well anytime soon. I'll go with, I've not seen anything even remotely close to that yet. I will say, but honestly, again, take that into consideration, though, in terms of reducing training time. So this is one of the things that is very applicable to this topic. You're training somebody to do a medical procedure. One of the things that happens is if you're in a surgical suite trying to train somebody to do a medical procedure, it might take, to train someone on a 5-minute procedure, it might take half an hour to set up that procedure in a surgical suite if you're going to try and do a physical simulation. Take that entire thing in a virtual simulation where reset is literally you press a button, reset, start over. What you're doing is you're eliminating the amount of time that it takes somebody to effectively go through multiple iterations of that training, which allows it to work faster. And I can say that this is something that VR and AR are actually doing directly today. Right now, it's actually one of the measurable results from a project that I was working on was the fact that something that would have taken 45 minutes to reset, we were, effectively there was about a 20-minute procedure that took a 45-minute reset, talking an hour and 5 minutes for a single iteration through that training. And we were allowing the people who were training to go through about 15 iterations sitting on a dock using augmented reality in the same amount of time. So, yeah, you're compressing time there. It's not directly into the brain, but I don't know. I don't know what I was going to say. With Level X, that's exactly the type of stuff that you're doing, because ultimately it's a matter of iteration and repetition, and it's something that this type of technology allows for. I don't know if you want to answer that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we see this in reality or real life basis, especially with the surgical example that you gave, where turnaround time, especially to room and to prep it for another patient, absolutely just as much time as followed the surgery. So what can we actually do in the AR VR world with that time? We can train multiple people utilizing the same type of mechanics, utilizing the same type of surgery, and still train them on how to increase the load in terms of how we would manage those surgical procedures, but also identify like new ways of potentially having that learning avenue. AI is a perfect example of that, what's currently happening.
Yeah, I just incidentally, I read an article just yesterday where they trained an LLM model on brain scan. Like they had people watch videos and read poetry and then thoughts. Like the AI has gotten, like just through passive means, after they trained the model, they were getting like high accuracy of being able to passively sentences, like 87%, like getting the gist of what someone's thinking about. That was pretty scary to think about, to be honest.
That's how far are we actually from actual AI takeover.
Yeah.
So Matt, we do have a question from the virtual space.
Go for it.
Yeah, I'd like to call on James. James, if you'd like to unmute yourself, you can ask your question.
Yes, thank you. This question is for Brian. The technology of hypersonic speed for passenger airplanes is coming up fast. What are your Wi-Fi solutions for hypersonic aircraft?
Excellent question. So the good news is that we've already tested this at that speed, right? Rockets, they're going just as fast as that and faster. That was one of the things we needed to make sure we could do, is that could we connect the spacecraft to a satellite and provide that internet connection? So the answer is yes. And so if you were a passenger on a hypersonic aircraft, then it would be a short sleeve environment, supposedly, just like an airplane, or that's the way it is on the International Space Station, for instance. So the Wi-Fi would basically work the same at that velocity. You would just log into the Solstar hotspot, basically, and then you'd be online. And then if the hypersonic aircraft company was smart, they'll buy our internet service so that you can use the Wi-Fi and internet while you're on board.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Back to you, Matt. Are you muted?
I apologize. I was live in the room here, but muted to VirBela. The question I wanted to ask again, just sort of about, obviously the body takes a lot of damage if it's in space. We spoke about that. I wanted to kind of throw that up to Emily a little bit, just because is that one of the things that, not obviously astronauts, like the NASA astronauts, they are peak physical condition. They go through years of training, but for people who are going to go up commercially, is that one of the bigger considerations of getting people in shape before they do this, so that they're A, better able to function in space, and B, hopefully more likely to not have too much damage when they come back?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, when we look at the commercial space tourism, well, I guess if you take a step back right now, if you guys are to get onto an aircraft to fly to a different state or a different country, nobody's asking you guys for a medical. But a long time ago, about almost 100 years ago, it was a very, very new thing. And so if you think about it in that perspective, yes, it's relatively in the near future to do commercial space tourism, but it is a bit far away. And we're not looking at physical preparation in the same sense that we would if you're a career astronaut. But what these simulated habitats allow us to do is to kind of see how those team dynamics would work. And that's essentially one of the biggest concerns, actually, is how those people are going to cope mentally in an isolated environment. In the physical aspect, maybe the duration might be a short time period. So we are looking a little bit more into that, into, the rehabilitation when you come back to Earth. But I think probably Shawna Pandya might be a little bit more knowledgeable in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. I can chime in here. And so some things about spaceflight we have figured out, and some of them we still need to figure out. So by this, I mean, how do we prepare humans for space? Part of it is through extensive selection. When we're talking about career astronauts, that includes physical, psychological, physiological testing. And so some of being an astronaut is a medical genetic lottery, I like to say. The path towards becoming a NASA astronaut is littered with the hopes and dreams of medically disqualified candidates. Amongst the history of the Canadian and American selections, folks have been disqualified for being deficient in iron, for being colorblind, for having had a pinched nerve. There's a whole host of reasons. Yet, with the rise of commercial space, accessibility and who gets to go to space is changing, both by virtue of profession. It's no longer just the military pilots, the engineers, the scientists. Now it's the storytellers, the entrepreneurs, the athletes who get to go, as well as those who would have been previously disqualified. And how that's possible is the risk and the mission profile. So when we look at the spectrum of doing a long duration mission on the International Space Station versus traditional commercial air travel that Emily alluded to, hopefully some of spaceflight, especially suborbital flight, is closer to commercial air travel. And so, there have been studies of how folks from 18 to 89 with heart disease, congenital heart defects, type 1 diabetes with insulin pumps have done in centrifuge studies on hypergravity environments in profiles that fit suborbital flights. And typically, they've actually all done well. The probability of something bad happening over the 3-minute zero gravity period you'd experience over most suborbital flights, or the end-to-end flight profile over the course of an hour or so, is actually pretty small. And typically, the most common reason someone was disqualified from those studies wasn't the medical condition itself, but it was anxiety, claustrophobia, panic, not being able to listen to directions, or doing something dangerous. So in that respect, space is opening up. And even more so, there are movements to make space open to those who may be considered disabled on Earth, and opening up the frontiers fully. And that's really because we've seen when we give humanity platforms, whether it's the internet, whether it's YouTube, or whether it's immersive technology, humans do amazing things. So I think we're at a really historic point when it comes to humans in space.
I also will just add to that, again, we come back to our capabilities and what we've already seen in the training and education space with immersive technologies, and being able to try them out in simulated environments, in very, very fully immersive environments. So it seems like those two things will go hand in hand for a long time. And that just, to me, makes a very promising case for its role in the industry. Matt?
Yeah, we got another question in the room here.
Yeah, this was actually just a personal question I had. Kind of a follow-on to what we were just talking about is, like, when you think about just random people on Earth going into space, we have I think the ISS simulator running on one of the headsets here, and I used it, and it was very disorienting. Like, being in space in zero gravity is very disorienting, and I'm wondering, with the whole space tourism industry, if VR will be a potentially big component of preparing people for this is what you might experience going up in space. And is that will that actually help prepare their brains for when they're actually in space, or have there been studies that tell whether that actually is helpful with actual astronauts or not?
Not to mention that I think we're going to see conditions that people are suffering from because they went to space. I think that's fair to say, but didn't want to pipe in there. Anybody wanted to reflect on that question?
So I think that's a fantastic question. I think it goes along the lines of what we're actually currently trying to accomplish at Level X, which is supplementing some level of training and supplementing some level of education. Now, I'm sure as we get more commercial spaceflight going, we're going to get a lot more data that we currently have on how it would actually impact training when it comes to in VR or AR settings. So I think as of right now, it would be a great opportunity. It would be a great supplement to showcase what a simulated environment actually looks like, whether it's ISS, whether it's low Earth orbit, or even deep space missions, just to get an understanding or a feel of what the environment looks like. But as data comes in, we're able to then tweak it based off of what actual real life data is showing. How does the environment actually behave? What does it actually feel like? We can all simulate that through either visuals or some level of haptics, which is something that I think there's definitely promise there.
Absolutely. And just to chime in on that, so NASA has this great article about how 9 ways VR and AR are used in space. And for those of you who've seen me talk about immersive and its value for medicine before, you've seen me borrow a slide from our friends at Oculus about the superpowers of immersive, and it retires risk. It builds muscle memory. It's a time saver, as we talked about. It's a cost saver. And so you can familiarize yourself with a high risk environment, whether you're talking about space flight, whether you're talking about being in the OR. It's incredibly valuable. So I think for those interested, I can definitely share that article in the chat.
All right, we have another question in the physical space here.
Yeah, I just have a question for Emily. This is going back to just body changing in space and inclusivity. I was wondering what training is like for people that might have reduced range of motion, or if they have like a fused spine, and how that would affect them in space.
So I can't really speak to how that might affect them in space. They don't necessarily have a medical background, but when it comes to the range of motion and things like that, a lot of times, when we do physical activity here on Earth and we do fitness training and physical therapy, we look at creating a quality of life that is enjoyable by the individual. And so ultimately, our range of motion will affect some of the activities that we're able to do in our daily lives. And that'll be the same in space, although the space will create an additional factor, of course, with some of the lack of gravity and things like that, and the inertia and momentum that we might not experience here on Earth. And so when we look at the range of motion, ultimately we're looking to be able to optimize an individual's quality of life to be able to perform tasks that are going to create an enjoyable life for them. And so when we look at training for that, it's going to be kind of meeting and adapting that fitness training or that physical fitness, the physical therapy element to that individual's current capabilities, and identifying what goals might be and what those requirements might be to help them achieve that eventually. And then also kind of providing them with the cognitive skills and the mental tools to be able to adapt to those environments as well.
And I actually have another question, if it's okay, Matt, in the virtual space. Stephen, did you want to ask the question?
Sure. Do I need to come up on stage or?
No, you can just ask it from there if you like.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, no problem. I just wanted to follow on from the previous question that we had about using, VR and AR to potentially train people to go into space, and would they be able to deal with the conditions there? And is there any consideration for what I would call sort of the opposite, where we have people with conditions that being on Earth exacerbates them, but going into space might actually help them, such as people with extreme arthritis, with 0G or micro G. You take a lot of that weight off of their bodies, could really increase their quality of living. And I just wondered if anybody was actually looking in that direction for possible uses of.
Yeah, I can comment on that. So what's been really exciting about increased accessibility to space beyond commercial or beyond space agencies is there's now pushes to make space accessible for all. And so there's Astro Access is a prime example. So they are an organization who have taken folks with mobility disorders, quadriplegia, paraplegia, blindness, deafness, and taken them on zero-G flights, parabolic flights, and had them do scientific experiments, had them do physiologic experiments, which was a world's first. And they've flown 2 missions now on zero-G planes, and now there's more and more. And one of the commercial human spaceflight initiatives that I advise, the Norwegian Next Steps initiatives, is looking at doing exactly that, the world's first commercial para-astronaut program. And in fact, historically, the European Space Agency, in its most recent selection, an astronaut selection announcement this year, announced its first ever para-astronaut, who is a British orthopedic surgeon, a Paralympian. He's a physician, scientist, who's also has a lower limb deficit. And so speaking specifically, like imagine for the first time, you know, as a quadriplegic who's been bound to a wheelchair, as a paraplegic, you suddenly have freedom of movement in 3 dimensions. That's so powerful. And so this is just the beginning of access and also understanding disability and ability and hyperability in a totally new environment. And this research is happening now. So it's a really, really amazing time to be alive in space medicine.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. Thanks.
All right, I'm going to let that be the last of that topic. That was amazing. Actually, that's bringing on a whole other thought there in terms of like space as medical treatment. But with that, I'm going to ask a couple of quick rapid fire questions of each of our panelists and give them sort of a final thought here. So with that, I'll call you guys kind of in a random order.
And Emily, Matt, just before you go, Emily, just so if you can mute, so we don't have any echo here going on when we ask the questions, unless you're answering the questions. Thanks.
And so first question, really quickly, can you share some of your initial assumptions about the work that you've done in this industry that changed your perspective or even your direction as you got into the industry? And I'm going to throw this one to Brian first.
So could you state the question again, please?
Sure. Can you share kind of some of your initial assumptions about the work as you were getting into the industry that may have, changed your perspective or your direction a bit once you learned?
Well, I've been wanting to be an astronaut, my whole life. So when I was studying in college in the 80s, first commercial astronaut flew on the space shuttle. He's Charlie Walker. He worked for McDonnell Douglas. So I remember being in class in college, and I'm like, man, I want to be a commercial astronaut, and it's going to happen soon. Because, the space shuttle was supposed to fly like every week. That's what it was, early planning. That's what they thought could happen. And then the Challenger accident happened in 86. And then the teacher on board and so forth. And so that just put a stop to people's hopes of being a commercial astronaut. So, and it just citizens being able to fly, which is just now starting to happen in the last 10 years, thankfully. But I just thought I was going to fly, by the time I was 30, 35. So, what I've learned, and so that accident could put the kibosh on that sort of thing. But also, space is really hard, and space projects take a long time.
Okay. You're in the physical space. You're next.
Yeah, so the way that I answer that question is not going to be probably space specific based off of what our company actually does, but I think it kind of on what I holistically thought what this industry was, which is focused on building video games for physicians or healthcare professionals, whether it's in space or not. Okay, I initially went into it thinking that it was going to be very straightforward, straight-laced, like they have this problem, we're going to identify it, and we're going to crush it. And we realized very, very quickly And if you've dealt with healthcare professionals, if you ask one physician for one opinion, you'll probably get 10 different opinions on whether it's a procedure or a very specific topic that you're actually talking about. So I realized very quickly the challenges that we're coming across in a video game industry that's building top-notch, hyper-realistic anatomical structures is not one answer. There's no one answer that fits all. And that was a very challenging learning experience because when you're building something, you have to kind of think about it not from one angle, but multiple different angles and making sure you're hitting your target audience at least 90% of the time. And that has been proven to be challenging, regardless of whatever specialty that we go into, regardless of whatever industry that we are in. And that's something that we're still dealing with on a almost on a daily basis at the company.
Okay, Dr. Pandya.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just building off what Dr. Varghese said, she nailed it, is that there's a saying, don't do it for me without me. And so my assumptions weren't so much about the austere environment and space sector. It was more about building tech for good that is actually useful to the end user. And always, there is no one size fits all solution. It's about figuring out what your user wants and then making sure they're involved throughout the whole process, throughout testing, throughout iteration, and going back to the drawing board when the solution isn't what the end user wanted. And so it's always about making it contextualized so that it actually isn't just a cool piece of tech, but one that is a piece of tech that can do a lot of good.
And finally, Emily.
Yeah, I'm going to go rogue a little bit here on this one. I hope that's okay. So my answer to that question is a little bit different. So before I came into the space industry, which was about really, I guess, 2.5, almost 3 years ago, everybody kept asking me, what are you going to do? What job? What's your career? What's your dream job? And there really wasn't like this one answer for me. And what I learned going into the space industry is that if there isn't a job for yourself that you really want and that you're really destined or that calls to you, then create that. I think that was probably like the biggest aha moment that I had whenever I entered the industry, because someone had asked me a question after I started my company, and they said, if you could be doing anything right now, with your life and in your career, what would it be? And I kind of had this emotional moment where I was like, you know what, I'm here, I'm doing it. And it wasn't a job that I had applied for. It was a job that I had created. And so there is a place for you in space. So if you are interested in being in the space industry, but you don't know how that fits, or maybe you don't see a job for yourself in the space industry, then it's up to you to go out there and create that job, because there is space for everyone in space.
Okay, Caroline, any last thoughts?
I will just, I guess I will say two things. One is I've been very involved in paying attention to the 3D printing industry and for a while now, and I just think it's going to be really interesting as we see how that industry is beginning to be able to produce larger pieces of equipment as well as smaller and cheaper, and also democratizing that whole world of building the things that might be able to go into space in more effective ways. And then the other thing I'll say is that I'm definitely interested in, and Brian and I spoke about this, that because I owned a wireless internet company many years ago, and we used to rent space on towers, and he also had shared that they are also piggybacking on other towers, so they're not just putting up towers, which is another part of being sustainable in your planning. But I'm really interested in to see how a lot of the smaller satellites and commercial satellite companies begin to become more and more, and how that is going to go and how that is going to unfold. So both on the sustainability side, but I'm also just mostly really thrilled that we have some fantastic women here tonight and Brian joining us. And I just feel like this has been such a great panel. So I'm super excited. Thank you all.
So welcome. Thank you.
All right. Yes. Again, one more round of applause for our panelists. Thank you very much for sharing your insights, sharing your expertise. That's our topic. Again, as I mentioned, so we do this every month. We are looking to get the word out for people. We're changing we're doing topics, a new industry topic every month. Ron is actually going to be leading next month in terms of e-commerce retail. That'll be our industry topic for next month. I'm going to throw up a couple more things. Again, this is, a reminder that this is a not-for-profit, and we are always looking for any sort of help we can get. So the next upcoming events, and I promise I will throw the QR code back up. I know it's here in the physical space, but the only way that the digital people can get it is if I throw it on the screen. So I'll go back to that as soon as we're done here for the NFT. But again, next month is e-commerce. July, we are going to not have an industry topic. There is not going to be a virtual aspect to the July event, I don't think. I'll talk with Tom about that. Which, by the way, is Tom still in VirBela? Is he in the space there?
He is. Yep.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, because, Tom is normally here helping coordinate all of the, craziness that takes place in the physical space here, but he happens to be joining the event from Australia right now. Thanks for...
Wow.
He's otherworldly, right, Tom?
Good day, Tom. Cool.
But with that, anyway, so thanks very much again, everybody. We hope to see you next month. Any questions? A big portion of this event is to be able to connect with the people. I believe pretty much everybody who spoke tonight, their profile is on the VRAR Chicago webpage. I've got our social media links up right now. Like us, follow us, do all the fun stuff that you do with social media, but ultimately go to the website if you have any questions, because you can actually directly connect with the people who have presented here. So if you have questions that you didn't want to ask live, feel free to just send them an email or a LinkedIn message afterwards.
And also, I will say, Matt, also the people who can connect with each other on LinkedIn, because it's a great chance for everybody to network together, including some of the in-person. And I know, Tom, it's a little harder to have the people in digital space know who was there in person, but get out on LinkedIn and connect with each other.
We're working on that. I'm working on a solution for that, but it's
fantastic.
It's going to be tricky.
Join us in World too. Everyone's welcome.
Yes, 100%.
All right, so with that, thank you very much. We're gonna end the live stream right now, and we hope to see you next month. Thank you very much. There's obviously still demos and food and drinks in the physical space here. VirBela, I'm gonna mute you in about 5 seconds.